The storm-covered world of Vortha loomed like a jagged wound against the void, its surface a tapestry of blackened rock, swirling tempests, and seas so acidic that even the strongest alloys corroded within hours. It was a world that tolerated no weakness, where only the most ruthless survived, where nature itself sought to eradicate as anything unfit to endure its merciless wrath. And from this place, from the depths of its endless struggle, the Dracari had emerged, not as rulers, not as thinkers, but as warriors molded in the crucible of a planet that knew no mercy. They were the apex of evolution's brutality, a species that had fought tooth and claw for dominance, not only over their own kind, but against the very planet that sought to extinguish them at every turn. For centuries, the Dracari had gazed upon the stars and seen them as nothing more than another battlefield. They had crushed empires before they could rise, shattered fleets before they could assemble, and eradicated any race that dared challenge them. Their empire stretched across hundreds of systems, each world conquered, each species subjugated, each resistance swiftly extinguished. None had ever posed a threat, none had ever been worthy of fear. Even those who had attempted to resist, those who had believed themselves strong, had ultimately succumbed to the inevitable reality that against the Dracari, survival was an illusion. So when a new system was discovered on the fringes of explored space, one containing a blue-green world, with an atmosphere rich in oxygen, liquid water, and sprawling continents, it was dismissed as unremarkable. A garden world, fragile and soft, unfit for true warriors. Their scouts confirmed that it was inhabited, its dominant species, humans, small fleshy bipeds with no natural weapons, no genetic advantages, and no biological defenses that could match even the weakest of Dracari offspring. Their cities were impressive but exposed, their technology efficient but lacking the brutality of war-forged empires. To the Dracari, it was a simple conquest waiting to happen. A world that would fall before their might like countless others had before. The decision was made in moments. They would take the planet. A single transmission was sent to the human leadership, a simple declaration of inevitability. There would be no prolonged diplomacy, no negotiations, no pretense of coexistence. The Dracari did not offer surrender. They demanded submission. They expected panic. They expected desperate pleas. They expected terror. What they received was something else entirely. The response came quickly, not with the frantic desperation of a species staring down its own extinction, but with an unnerving, almost casual efficiency. A single human figure, clad in dark military attire, appeared on their comms. His expression unreadable, his posture relaxed. His voice, when he spoke, carried no fear, no hesitation, only the calm certainty of a man who had already calculated every possible outcome. "My name is General Elias Carter," the human said. "We received your message. We have evaluated your threat." He tilted his head slightly, almost in amusement. "And we have decided that you are not worth our time." Then the transmission ended. The bridge of the Dracari warship Bloodfang was silent, but it was not the silence of discipline or focus. It was the silence of warriors, confronted with something they did not understand. The massive flagship, an instrument of planetary subjugation, hovered in geostationary orbit above Earth, its weapons primed, its invasion fleet standing by. And yet, for the first time in centuries, the Dracari did not know how to proceed. Commander Sirak, Primogen of Vortha, sat in his command throne, his armored fingers digging into the reinforced metal of the armrests. His silver eyes remained locked on the main display, where the last image of the human general still lingered, frozen at the moment he had ended the transmission. "We have decided that you are not worth our time." The words replayed in Sirak's mind, gnawing at the edges of his certainty. He had invaded countless worlds, fought against empires that had screamed defiance before crumbling under Dracari might. Yet so never before had an enemy dismissed them with such indifference. A soft growl escaped from his throat, low and sharp. "Analysis? What are they doing?" His chief strategist, Vorak, An elder Drakari with deep crimson scales and a body marked by the scars of 100 wars, did not answer immediately. Instead, his claws tapped against the control panel, cycling through planetary data, his frills twitching in agitation. "They are not evacuating," he finally said. His voice was hesitant, as if the words themselves defied logic. "There are no distress signals, no mass mobilization of civilians. Their orbital defenses remain powered but inactive. They are not preparing for war." "Then they are fools," Zirak spat, his voice edged with impatience. "They stand on the brink of extinction and do nothing." Vorak hesitated. "It is not nothing, Primogen. They are moving troops, but not as we expected." He turned one of the auxiliary screens toward Zirak. "These are their largest military bases. Instead of centralizing forces for planetary defense, they are spreading out. Their forces are dispersing across key regions, reinforcing infrastructure, fortifying civilian areas, but without the pattern of a defensive war." He exhaled slowly. "It is as if they do not intend to defend their planet at all. It is as if they are preparing for something else entirely." Zirak's frills flared with irritation. "What could be more important than defending their world from annihilation?" Vorak's claws twitched as he processed more data. "Primogen, their fleet is not responding to our presence. They have warships, but none have taken formation. Their vessels remain docked. Their orbital stations remain fully powered but unmoving. They see us. They know we are here. And yet they do nothing." The command bridge remained still. The idea of an enemy refusing to acknowledge them was alien to every warrior present. Even the proudest, most defiant of their past conquests had at least attempted to resist, had launched futile attacks, had tried to fight back. But the humans were the waiting. Zirak exhaled slowly, his claws flexing. A subtle unease crept along his spine, but he crushed it before it could take root. "Then let them watch," he said, his voice cold and sharp as steel. "They refuse to act? Then we shall force their hand." With a flick of his claws, he activated the invasion command sequence. The time for patience was over. The Drakari would land. And then they would see if the humans were truly as indifferent as they pretended to be. The Drakari invasion force descended upon Earth like a storm of fire and steel. Drop pods rained from the sky, their impact shaking the very ground, splitting asphalt and cracking open city streets. Warships loomed in low orbit, their cannons primed, ready to reduce resistance to mirashes. In every other conquest before this, the sight of Drakari warriors, tall, armored, their claws capable of tearing through steel, had been enough to send entire civilizations into a panic and surrender. But Earth was not like any other world. The first wave of Drakari shock troops emerged from the wreckage of their landing pods, expecting fear, expecting chaos. They had landed in what the humans called New York City, a dense cluster of towering structures that should have made for an easy conquest. Their strategy had been simple: hit fast, overwhelm defenses, and establish total control before the enemy could mount a meaningful response. What they found instead was silence. The streets were empty, not abandoned in haste, abandoned by design. The power grid was still active, lights blinking in buildings, neon signs humming. Against the night, there were no civilians screaming, no desperate masses running for shelter. There were no emergency broadcasts crying for help. The Drakari commander, Gor Vok, narrowed his silver eyes, scanning the empty streets with unease. "This is wrong," he growled, his voice crackling through the squad's comms. "Where is the resistance?" His second-in-command, a seasoned warrior named Vorak, lifted his plasma rifle, scanning the rooftops. "Our scouts reported human strongholds in this city," he said, his tone laced with suspicion. "There should be millions here. Soldiers, civilians, resistance fighters." He turned to his commander, his frilled crest rising in discomfort. "Why would they abandon their own city? Why wouldn't they defend it?" A crackle of interference whispered through their comms. At first, just static, then something else. Laughter. Soft at first, then growing, distorted, but unmistakably human. And then the lights went out. The entire city was plunged into darkness in a fraction of a second. The Drakari adjusted their visors immediately, switching to thermal vision, only to find that their sensors were now useless. Their HUDs flickered, scrambled, something jamming their readings, something deliberate. Then the first shots rang out. It wasn't from the streets below. It came from above, from the rooftops, from the shadows, from places they had not even thought to check. Sniper fire ripped through the ranks of the Drakari, taking down warriors one with perfect precision. Plasma rounds burned through armor, piercing weak spots with surgical efficiency. These were not blind, desperate soldiers firing in fear. These were hunters. Vorak barely had time to react before a bullet ripped through his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. He roared in pain, gripping the wound, but his mind was fixated on something far worse than the injury. The humans had let them land. They had let them deploy. They had baited them and now the hunt had begun. The battle for Earth was nothing like the Drakari had expected. They had come prepared for total domination, for another effortless conquest to add to their long history of victories. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a war, unlike any they had ever fought. The humans did not fight like prey. They did not fight like the empires the Drakari had crushed before. They fought like predators. Every street, every building, every ruined highway became a death trap. The Drakari, used to overwhelming their enemies with brute force and direct assaults, found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outthought at every turn. They had superior strength, superior technology, superior numbers, but it did not matter. Because humans were fighting a different kind of war. Drakari squads moved cautiously through the remains of the city, their armor gleaming in the dim emergency lights that flickered like dying stars. They advanced in tight formations, their plasma rifles scanning for movement, their claws ready to tear apart any resistance that dared show itself. And yet, they never saw the attacks coming. One moment, a soldier would be walking, checking his scanner, then gone. No sound, no warning, only the sudden realization that their numbers were dwindling one by one. Their communications were jammed. Their HUDs flickered with static. Their sensors refused to register movement, as if the enemy was not just hiding, but somehow erasing themselves from detection entirely. Gorvok, once so sure of the Drakari's strength, now found himself gripping his weapon too tightly, his breathing too fast, his instincts screaming that something was deeply, horribly wrong. "Commander!" Vorak's voice came through the static, strained, frantic in a way Gorvok had never heard before. "They're not fighting us head-on. They're bleeding us dry. We need to regroup." Gorvok opened his mouth to respond, but then the ground beneath them exploded, not in a firestorm of plasma, not in a simple detonation. The street itself collapsed, revealing tunnels, human tunnels, an entire underground network, designed not to protect, but to ambush. Before the Drakari could react, the shadows inside those tunnels came alive. Figures clad in matte black armor emerged without a sound, their weapons firing before their enemies could even aim. They moved with surgical precision, striking weak points in the Drakari armor with bullets that pierced through like the scalpel cuts on exposed flesh. They used smoke distraction and brutal efficiency, appearing for only seconds before melting into the darkness again. This was not war, this was a hunt. And for the first time in their existence, the Drakari realized they were not the hunters. They were the Hun prey. The Drakari war machine was unraveling. What had begun as a routine conquest had transformed into a nightmare, a slow, agonizing realization that they were not fighting an inferior species. They were fighting something else entirely. The humans did not engage in the kind of war the Drakari understood. They did not meet them in open battle, did not fight for honor or dominance. They fought to kill. Every encounter was a calculated execution. Every engagement ended with more Drakari missing than dead, more fear than casualties. Their warriors, once fearless, now spoke in hushed tones over encrypted comms, whispering of figures that moved through the darkness without making a sound, of weapons that killed without warning, without fire, without energy traces. Entire battalions were disappearing overnight, not slaughtered in battle. Vanished. Camps left intact, weapons undisturbed, vehicles still powered. But not a single soldier remained. Commander Yurik, watching this horror unfold from orbit, knew they had to regroup, had to adapt. But how could one adapt to an enemy that was already 10 steps ahead? His claws tapped against the armrest of his throne, his mind racing through every possible scenario. "Report," he growled, his voice low, strained. A communication officer turned, his frills pressed flat against his neck in distress. "Primogen, we have intercepted human transmissions. They are speaking of us in ways we do not understand." Zirak narrowed his silver eyes. "Explain." The officer hesitated, then relayed the message through the ship's speakers. The audio crackled for a moment, then a human voice, cold, emotionless, filled the command deck. "Zone Theta secure. 3 enemy squads neutralized, 0 casualties on our side. Mission duration 7 minutes. Another voice. "Roger, units Ghost 12 and Phantom 7 repositioning for next phase. Targeted disruption successful. Enemy morale." At projected threshold. Then a third voice, lower, deliberate. "They don't even realize it yet. They still think this is a war." Zirak's frills rose sharply. His mind processed the words faster than he wanted to admit. This was not just a battle. This was an experiment. The humans weren't just fighting them. They were testing them, studying them, learning their every move before erasing them. The realization hit with the weight of a collapsing star. They were not at war with humans. They were prey being played with by a superior predator. Zirak rose from his seat, his voice a sharp, commanding snarl. "Recall all forces now." A hesitation, then a transmission from the surface, static, faint breathing, then a whisper directly into their secured military channel. Too late. Then the entire fleet's communications went dark. The Drakari fleet floated in orbit, silent, powerless, blinded. The vast warships that had once brought fear across the galaxy were now adrift. Their systems dead, their crews cut off from each other, trapped in the vastness of space, without communication, without coordination, without hope. Commander Jirax stood frozen in place, his claws clenched at his sides, his mind racing through the impossible reality before him. How? How had an inferior species done this? How had they crippled an entire invasion force without ever meeting them in open battle? The answer clawed at the edges of his thoughts, a truth he refused to accept. The humans had never been at war. They had never treated this as a battle, never fought on the terms the Drakari understood. Instead, they had done what true predators. So they had isolated the weakest, they had studied the strongest, and when they were ready, when they had struck. The bridge was eerily quiet. The crew stared at their controls, their monitors dead, their attempts to re-establish power met only with failure. The entire fleet was compromised, their warships reduced to floating tombs. A flicker, a single pulse of power. Then, a transmission. It was not Drakari, it was human. The main screen of the power bloodfang flared to life, revealing the same figure from before, General Elias Carter. But this time, he was not a distant message. He was here, staring directly into Zirak's eyes. "How?" Carter said, his voice steady, calm, completely in control. "You were never worth our time. Zirak's frills flared, his muscles coiled, his breath sharp. "What have you done?" he growled, his voice low, dangerous. Carter leaned slightly forward, his expression unreadable. "We let you come," he said simply. "We let you believe you were in control. We let you land, let you deploy, let you set the stage." His lips curled slightly. "And then we took everything from you." Zirak's heart pounded like war drums. "Release my fleet." Carter exhaled, almost in amusement. "You still don't get it." He leaned back, tilting his head slightly, his eyes cold as steel. "You don't leave this system, you don't go home, there is no retreat." Zirak took an involuntary step forward, his claws flexing. "You mean to execute us all?" Carter shook his head slowly. "No, that would be too easy." The screen flickered. A new image appeared. Not of the Drakari fleet, of Vortha. Their homeworld. Zirak's blood ran cold. Carter's voice was a whisper now, low and deliberate. "You came here thinking you were the apex predators." He paused, his gaze unrelenting. "You aren't." The signal cut. And then the killing began.